Good morning. So this panel, we're going to talk about the opportunities for growth from an investor perspective across a couple of different industries and themes. You earlier this month had a new president assume the role here in Mexico, and as you may have heard, the country just to the north of you is also having an election sometime soon. But I think when you're at the beginning, it can be filled with the hope and possibilities about what's to come. So I want to start with you, Altagracia, at the end. You were recently appointed to advise the president on regional economic development. So whether it's nearshoring or sustainable development, what's on the top of your agenda, and what are you hopeful about accomplishing?
Thank you. Well, we are very excited about the first female president in North America. It is an exciting time for Mexico. We do believe it's Mexico's moment in the world, really, due to geopolitics, but due to the fact that in many ways Mexico is ready to put a foot forward and become a leader in a new type of globalization, being it with a regional emphasis, with nearshoring, reshoring, friendshoring, however we want to call that. And Mexico can also step up in a new type of capitalism. The prize is ESG. The prize is one of the five principles that we work throughout the campaign and that are at the forefront of the plans of regional economic development or our national nearshoring strategy, which are inclusion, innovation, sustainability, regional vocations, and digitalization. And so when you look at those five principles and how those five principles will come into play with the different ministries within the cabinet, at a local level with all of the states in Mexico and the municipalities, but also with the business community, because this was a plan that was made with the business community through dialogues, through an exercise called Diálogos por la Transformación. We realize that there is an important, that there are important tasks or objectives that we need to achieve in order, on the one hand, to spearhead this opportunity of nearshoring that comes with a promise of growth, economic growth, but that also needs to come with a promise of shared prosperity. And so for inclusion, we said we need to include people we've never included in our economy. We need to include women. We need to include young people. We need to include small and medium businesses. And we need to include the south and southeastern part of Mexico. In innovation, we can't base our competitiveness on low wages. That is just not right. And it's just not smart. It is not smart for the short term. It is not smart for the medium and long term. And Mexico is the sixth country in the world with most engineers. We have 149,000 new engineers every year, and more than 400,000 graduates from STEM careers every year. That's double Brazil and more per capita than the United States. And we need goals for them, and we need opportunities for them. So we need progressive objectives of technological transfer of all the industries that are coming to Mexico on the one hand, and we need incentives for R&D, research and development. On sustainability, and if you know Dr. Sheinbaum's profile, you'll know she's a scientist, but she's also an activist on the climate side. And so she set a very ambitious standard or goal of 45% renewable energies by 2030. But she's also set the plan for water, magnification of rural areas, better usage of water, circular economy laws, and how we manage our waste disposal. And then we talk about digitalization and simplification. And if you know what she did in Mexico City in the 6 years or 5 years she was mayor of it, she realizes that to be an ally of the business community, you need to, on the one hand, better the relationship between government and citizen, all government and all citizens, not only investors. And so she says, we need to stop thinking about making better laws. We need to make less laws. And so if you know Mexico's judicial ordainment. We have about 22,000 federal permits and tramits you need to go through in order to invest. And in Mexico City, you had 2,000 of them. And she cut it down to 500. And you had 15 requisites per tramit. She cut it down to 5. And she's made a promise to cut down 50% of permits and tramits, to cut 50% of the time you need to invest in Mexico, 2.7 years to 1.3, and to digitalize 80% of tramit. And that comes with the objective of lowering corruption, making the relationship more agile, more transparent, and obviously less discretional on the concrete. And the last big plan or the big principle we have set as an objective is regional vocations, because we recognize that urban areas in Mexico City doesn't relate to Chiapas in the way Jalisco doesn't really relate to Oaxaca, or the northern border doesn't really relate to the southern border. And then there's different challenges and there's different opportunities that we need to be fomenting, incentivizing there. And so we came up with this idea of 10 industrial corridors alongside, she calls them polos de bienestar, which are clusters. And corridors have to do with the logistics infrastructure that will give you competitiveness. Where's the freight trains, where's the ports, where's the airports, where's the border crossings and whatnot. And the clusters have to do with ecosystems. And when you've seen what Bajío has done with the automotive industry or aerospatial industries, you see that the benefits of doing industrial corridors or of incentivizing clusters come in 3 ways, and I'll stop with this. But the first is when you specify on which microregions can have the most possibility of growth through consolidation or through specialization, right? Where you already have a footprint, you make an even larger footprint. And we have a footprint in the 10 most strategic industries of the world, present and future. Semiconductors, electronics, electromobility and automotive industry, pharmaceutical and medical devices, agro industry and whatnot, tourism. So on the first hand, you're able to grow more organically through consolidation and specialization, develop local suppliers and whatnot. The second thing it allows you to do is give incentives. You want incentives in 3 ways: prioritizing infrastructure, public spending through infrastructure. You want incentives, fiscal incentives, and you want a different type of incentive, which is you want fast track to permits and tramits. You want to do it fast. And the third thing, which is maybe one of the most important to her, is you want to have some urban planning around that investment. You don't want to make past mistakes right all over again, where growth or where the short term took a hedge on the long term. And cities like Ciudad Juárez, where manufacturing grew very fast after previous NAFTA. Manufacturing grew fast, violence against women grew faster, and a lack of public transportation, social housing, lighting, whatnot. And so allowing to do this industrial corridors allows you to do some urban planning. That'll get you the objectives you want to get, elevating regional and national content, elevating dual education programs, certifications, reskilling and upskilling of students. We have a huge demographic bonus and whatnot. You also want sustainability principles. And so
those are a lot of ingredients that are gearing up for more growth, as I see. The Mexican economy already passed $2 trillion, is the 12th largest economy in the world. Part of our assembling this global pool of investors is to understand the opportunity for moving capital here, but there's also a lot of Mexican companies investing in Mexico. So Agustin, I want to go to you, because earlier this year, Grupo Coppel announced a 12 billion peso investment to remodel existing stores and reduce your environmental footprint at the same time. you're opening an additional 100 stores to add to your nearly 1,800 existing locations in Mexico. I think that may surprise people who have a different perception about the state of brick and mortar retail today. So give us a sense of, how do you see the future of retail here in Mexico? And why was this the right time to start focusing on making your stores more eco-friendly?
Thank you. And I want to tell you that I first that I get a license to speak in Spanish today.
You did.
This is the Milken before we begin, so I will try to change to Spanish. Sí, el nivel de inversión que estamos requiriendo en la empresa, en Grupo Coppel, son las tiendas, el banco, la Afore y las inmobiliarias que tenemos, ha sido un gran reto y pues no podemos pararnos. Tiene que seguir esto con un ritmo y con un enfoque ahorita en nuestro reto más grande, que es el tema digital. Tenemos competidores globales de primer nivel y pues ya de pronto ya nos enfrentamos con Amazon, con Mercado Libre, con otra serie de marcas que lo hacen muy bien, que son muy relevantes en el país y que requiere la empresa, que es una empresa de retail comercial, con una historia, 80 años de crecimiento, encontrar nuestras fortalezas frente a esto y poder competir con ellos y poder ser una opción muy viable para nuestros clientes. Entonces, lo primero que tenemos que darnos cuenta es que cuáles son, qué cosas tiene Grupo Coppel que no tienen los demás competidores. Y pues ahí tenemos una lista importante y queremos como fortalecer nuestras fortalezas, montarnos en lo que estamos bien, en lo que ya es un hecho que lo hacemos bien, para partir de ahí y poder competir de una mejor manera. Tenemos una base de datos de clientes muy importante, de muchos años. De hecho, tenemos preautorizadas líneas de crédito para más de 15 millones de personas. Tenemos también una historia de cobranza, no solo cobranza en los CAT, sino también cobranza en los centros de atención telefónica, sino también en calle. Tenemos un pequeño ejército de cobranzas y entregamos estados de cuenta, entregamos notificaciones, confirmamos el domicilio, y todos estábamos enfocados en la clase media y clase baja, alta, clase media baja, un poquito queriendo competir también en la clase media alta. Y este mercado, que es el más grande de México, requiere de muchas necesidades. Y eso es lo que hemos venido construyendo con las 1,700 tiendas que tenemos, 1,700 puntos de venta, donde están todos los servicios financieros también que ofrecemos. Entonces, esa es una primera base, el tema de que podemos dar crédito, podemos darle accesibilidad a muchas personas que no lo tienen. De hecho, el 80% prácticamente de los que nos solicitan crédito jamás han tenido crédito en una institución formal y somos como su primera historial de crediticio. Estamos informamos a todos los burós de crédito y todo, entonces ahí ellos pueden ir construyendo para tener otros accesibilidad a otros créditos. La otra fortaleza que tenemos es en la entrega a domicilio, porque ya estamos entregando más del 95% de las personas prácticamente del país. Les podemos entregar en 3 días, porque tenemos como 23 centros de distribución distribuidos por todo el país y tenemos todo es interno, entrega propia. También contratamos algunos para hacer entregas especializadas, pero ese nivel de entregas y de entregar sobre todo productos grandes de alto volumen, o sea, salas, recámaras, colchones, televisiones, en eso destacamos y lo hacemos muy bien, y tenemos todo el servicio postventa de instalaciones, de garantías, etcétera, que todo esto le cuesta un poco más trabajo todavía a la competencia global. Entonces, montados en en nuestras propias fuerzas, queremos hacer mejor esto para poder competir de una mejor forma. Y la inversión en tecnología, por eso es un número tan grande, pues nos ha llevado a estar renovando prácticamente todo y de tener una historia de muchos años de sistemas y de sistema legado que lo fuimos construyendo. Pues llegó el momento de darnos cuenta que esa arquitectura que tenemos y esa forma no nos iba a dar espacio para el futuro. Y parece increíble porque ahorita pues compramos, vendemos, pagamos, no nos falta la mercancía, tenemos todos los productos que vendemos, que son como 100,000 diferentes SKUs, están controlados, pero aún así el sistema y la arquitectura del sistema no tiene esa capacidad que debería de tener como para ser más omnicanal y que el cliente pueda comprar en su celular, pueda comprar en tienda, pueda recibir en tienda el producto y que eso la otra parte, la red de tiendas que no se tiene en Amazon, en otros lados. Y cómo nosotros vamos a aprovechar esa palanca para poder competir en el mercado. Entonces estamos en esta ola tecnológica, compitiendo y invirtiendo y usando la inteligencia para poder que las inversiones y que las decisiones realmente impacten en dar un mejor servicio.
Thank you. So Rob, I want to get the investor's perspective into the conversation. You had a great first half of the year at Discovery.
Sure.
And Latin American exposure was helpful to those returns.
Yep.
You've been an investor a long time down here. What makes you bullish on Latin American markets? Are you finding sufficient opportunities to deploy capital in the region? And what do you think other investors are missing about the opportunity here if they're not coming?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rich. Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. I think it really has to come down to significant political shifts happening now for a positive in Latin America. I think it's led by Milei in Argentina. You got Bukele in El Salvador, you got Noboa in Ecuador, and hopefully Sheinbaum here in Mexico, which we think will happen as well. And then we think we're going to have very positive change in Brazil and Peru in the next 2 years. So we think that these governments are embracing capital markets, free markets, security, and rule of law for the people, and freedom. And that is a big change. We think they're going away from this populist model, which has not worked. It has not worked anywhere. And the region can also benefit dramatically from what's happening in China. China's like the every other word we're talking about in this conference. And I did a conference call yesterday with 600 Chinese local investors in China. Did a Zoom with them. And I had to deliver a very tough message, but they knew the message. They're scared. They do not like what they see happening in their country, and they're not sure what to do about it because they can't do anything about it. So, when I was in Tiger hedge fund in the early 90s, the real secret to Tiger's success in the 90s, we were known as great stock pickers and that. We did a good job with that, but really was a macro trade. We were short Asia and we were long North America and a little bit in Europe. And that trade worked incredibly well. But I think the trade is the same trade today. They just changed the names to protect the innocent. The short back in the 90s was Japan. The long was the US and a little bit in Western Europe. Today, the short is China. And the long is the US, but a lot of Latin America as well. You have very, very low multiples in Latin America relative to the rest of the world. You have growing businesses. And if these governments are able to just allow the private sector to operate, we think that this growth is going to come. There's great, the demographics are very favorable, young demographics. And there's not a lot of foreign investors who are invested in these markets. A lot of money is in China. It's coming out of China. A lot's come out already. There's more to come out. And we see not only portfolio investors like ourselves, but direct investment coming tremendously. And Mexico can be the biggest beneficiary of that. Let me give you one example of one company so our largest company we own in our portfolio is a Mexican company. It's American Mobile. And, it's an incredibly well-run, competitive company. It trades at 5 times EBITDA, generates 10% free cash flow yield, buys back 10% of their stock, and it's dominant in every market they're in Latin America. You can't find it. It's the best telecom operator value, best investment in the world. There's another company we own here called Alsea. You know, they have Domino's Pizza and Starbucks Coffee. And they have other brands, but those are the two major ones. Well, they just announced earnings. They're growing same-store sales of Starbucks of 9%. They're growing Domino's Pizza. I forget what the number was, but it was a very good number. And yet, Starbucks announced in the same day, their same-store sales are falling 7%. Yet, Starbucks trades at 15 times EBITDA. Domino's Pizza trades at 19 times EBITDA. And I'll say it trades at 5. It's ridiculous. Faster growing, well-run business, very dominant in the markets that they're in, and Mexico is the most important market for them. And they trade at 1/3 the multiple of the brands that they actually represent. Crazy, crazy. So that's the kind of opportunity that we see and why we think Latin America is such a wonderful spot to be. And, you know, we have a 25-year track record, and we've done a great job over that time. In the last couple of years, Latin America has led us to, you know, very substantial returns relative to our competitors, and I think it'll continue. And we're just seeing the money begin to flow into a lot of these places.
When you think about the countries as you laid them out in the beginning of your comments, how are you factoring geopolitical risk into your investment decisions, given that the world can feel very fractious at this moment?
I think it's the highest geopolitical risk of my lifetime, and it's enormous, and everyone is kind of, at least a lot of U.S. investors in particular, the global investors, are really asleep at the wheel. You know, when Xi says that in China that he is going to unify China, he means he's going to take Taiwan. And one thing that Xi does is when he says something, he does it. So I don't know if it happens this year, next year, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, it's going to happen. And on top of that, obviously, we know the Middle East situation with Iran. I think Israel is going to strike Iran aggressively. They're going to take out the oil export terminal. Come on. They are going to debilitate this country so they can't fund all this terrorism that they funded against Israel all these years. So people are sitting there. Oil's at $70 a barrel. I think it's crazy. I think it's going to be at 90. You've got $3 downside probably and like $30 upside. So there's so much risk out there, and everyone is piled into corporate America, whether it's private equity or private credit or U.S. equities or venture capital. It's not just the U.S. U.S. households are longer U.S. equities they've ever been in 100 years as a percentage of their wealth. We have the lowest equity premium, risk premium in the United States in 100 years. The market is so ridiculously overvalued. The last two times it was at this level was 1929, we had a crash, and in 1999, we had the 2000 collapse of the NASDAQ. So, you know, we're net short equities in our portfolio. We're up 35% this year being net short. We're doing it the old-fashioned way. We're long the ones like an Alsea and America Mobile and a lot of Argentine assets. And it's not just equities that are attractive. There's a lot of the fixed income instruments, the local market instruments, the currencies we think are generally undervalued. So it's a whole realm of investments that are available in Latin America that we think are incredibly attractive.
So, Altagracia, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned, and that is participation of women. So we, the Milken Institute, recently released a report showing that if Mexico only increased the women's participation in the workforce, you would turbocharge the economy to new heights. You have about a 45% participation rate of women. What can the government do from a policy perspective to incent women into the workforce and take advantage of this untapped capital?
So listen, women in the workforce is very important for Mexican growth. It is also very important to have women as examples of leadership. And so having the first female president sets that example and sets that as a priority. And when you look at public policy and how public policy has transformed the political sector and women leadership within the political sector over the past really 2 decades, you've seen that you have now 13 women governors out of 32. You have a chair, or you've had chairs over the House of Representatives. You had a women chair over the Senate. You have a woman chairing the Supreme Court of Justice, and now you have a woman also chairing the executive branches. When you look at the business community, and this room is an example of that, we're kind of missing out there. You know? When you look at the Forbes list, we're kind of missing. You know, when you look at our percentage of women in boards, it's only 12%. We're stock exchange companies in Mexico. And so on the one hand, there is public policy that can be done to increment women being able to stay in work after being a mother, because motherhood is at the center of why they have a disadvantage in regards to men. You know, and we've been talking about el Sistema Nacional de Cuidados and Social Security for those dependent on women care, for small children, for our parents, or for any elder, no, that usually is taken care of by women. We're talking about the recognition, and this was one of her first reforms that was passed, of women's work. And she's starting a social program to recognize the labor of women between 60 and 64 years, especially those who work in maquilas and those who work in rural areas, jornaleras, that have been forsaken for the longest time. And the other big thing that has less to do with public policy, but more to do with family. It is not only that we need to ensure the proper education for women. There is not only a gender gap or wage gap, there's also a dream gap that we need to work on. You know, and right now you're having, at a global level, the largest transfer of wealth from baby boomers to millennials. And millennial women are the first women, at least in Mexico, that were born with every right, civil and political liberties, but also social, economic, and cultural rights. You were able to own a bank account. You were able to divorce. You were able to go to work without asking for permission. And so to have more women owners will bring about the change in how we see and do business, and who we sit at our boards, and who we're giving opportunities, who we're mentoring. And so, and I'll end up with this, to change women equality, or to attain women equality in the workforce, we do need public policy, and that is being implemented and at the forefront. On the one hand, to reduce violence so that they can transition from school to work without having to experience domestic or otherwise form of violence. On the other hand, to recognize or incorporate the non-paid work they do at home. And on the third side, of education information. But in order to change how women, or women's position in business, we can't just look at the stock exchange companies, and we're gonna have to go and change the family and how they're raised and what the opportunities they're giving, but also what aspirations they're taught to have. And there's a long way to go, but I think it will advance profoundly within those 6 years or next 6 years.
But I think that notion of who has opportunity and who doesn't really speaks to the workforce preparedness that we encounter all over the world. Agustin, I want to go back to you. You employ a very large workforce of some 120,000 people. When you think about workforce participation and developing skills for the future, I know that you've invested in something called Coppel Corporate University. Tell us about that. Tell us what your motivation was in starting it, and are there any early lessons that you have to share?
Bueno, para desarrollar un buen proceso de capacitación en una empresa grande, no puede ser un solo modelo, ¿no? Sino son modelos especializados para las diferentes áreas. Es una capacitación específica, propia, y que tenga su propia libertad de capacitación, todo el tema de sistemas, de redes digitales, de plataformas, otro para el tema financiero, otro para el tema comercial, y el tema de logística, el tema de cadena de suministro. O sea, las diferentes áreas requieren diferentes capacitaciones. Pero sí, al final de cuentas, de hecho esto me lo comentaba una una joven que estudiaba en Londres y su maestría era de capacitación on tablet. That's it. Porque la verdad, todo termina en una tablet. O sea, la capacitación termina en la gente interactuando con un device, con su tablet de preferencia, y ahí teniendo un proceso de capacitación especializado. El tema es el contenido se le tiene que meter ahí. Es un contenido que se tiene que producir y que es difícil de producir y es difícil de diseñar y de supervisar y de estructurar y de que sea atractivo y que funcione y que genere lo que queremos que genere de capacitación. Y ahí está el reto, por eso nosotros le llamamos universidad, como le ha llamado otras empresas también, pero universidad en el concepto de que tenemos capacitaciones especializadas y las tienes que pasar paso por paso. Cuando tuvimos un proceso con Apple de tener unas pequeñas tiendas donde vendíamos productos de Apple, no era el Apple Store, sino eran como 3 escaloncitos abajo. Ellos tenían en el propio celular la capacitación y ahí ibas ganando gold medals y subías tu nivel y si subías tu nivel y al ir subiendo tu nivel tú ibas, o sea, es una experiencia personalizada con el contenido que tenga esto. Y eso se puede llevar hasta la limpieza de un lugar, hasta cómo almacenar un producto, o cómo venderle a un cliente, o cómo vender un seguro, cómo hacer un proceso de una alta en un servicio financiero que son complejos en todos lados. Entonces, la capacidad que tiene que tener el departamento de capacitación es en producir el contenido y ir a las diferentes áreas de negocio para absorber toda la información y tener una capacidad para presentarlo de una manera didáctica y entendible. Y ese es un gran reto que en cuanto se logra avanzar, pues empieza a notar la capacitación en todos lados. Por otro lado, en alto nivel hemos tratado de hacer más utilizar las universidades internacionales y darles acceso también a capacitaciones especializadas o a maestrías en buenas universidades. El talento que tiene el Grupo Coppel pues es muy capaz y ellos están siempre willing to do it, ¿no? O sea, quieren y nosotros estamos apoyándolos en ello. Siempre ha sido una experiencia muy buena que durante el trabajo tomen unas 2 semanas, 3 semanas de capacitación, porque están ya dentro de la empresa, están con una serie de retos y están absorbiendo eso, como que cuando estás en la escuela, en la universidad, no sabes ni para dónde vas, entonces estás como viendo el todo. Aquí ya sabes a dónde vas y qué quieres lograr y el conocimiento es más directo. Y por último, a nivel general, si tienes 120,000 personas, pues quieres saber que los 120,000 tomaron este curso, que los 120,000 tomaron esto, y eso requiere también una estructura de control robusta. Si yo no quiero tener a ningún vendedor que no esté con un curso de ventas muy bien hecho, entonces tengo que tener como comparamos a las diferentes áreas, es decir, qué tanto tienes de porcentaje de capacitación, cumplieron con la capacitación, y eso pues te lo da una plataforma digital. Y también no hemos dejado de tener unos cursos sobre la responsabilidad personal, la responsabilidad en la empresa, y luego un tercer curso que es la responsabilidad dentro de su comunidad, que han sido muy exitosos, duran como un día entero y eso sí los hemos querido dar, que sean personas que no trabajan en la empresa, de fuera, que dan estos cursos que ya están muy diseñados, que han tenido mucho éxito y que la gente los ve muy bien, como para tener algo más amplio que no sea hard sell things.
Thank you. So, Rob, as Augustin said, the speed of change, our reliance on technology today is something our grandparents couldn't have imagined, and our grandchildren will have an unbelievable technological life that we can't even think about. So the speed of change as it impacts markets and as you think about it as an investor, this year marks your 25th anniversary at Discovery. Congratulations.
Thank
Not
you.
many funds last that
Well,
long, but you've
thank
seen
you.
a lot of different markets over that period of time.
Sure.
Tell us what's changed the most from when you started Discovery to today? And then how do you think one change we were talking about earlier is when you started Discovery, the US government didn't have $35 trillion of debt. How do you think about that kind of as an overhang to your investments going forward?
Well, I think the markets have changed a lot in the last 35 years. I've been doing this and 25 years at Discovery, but some things have stayed the same, and I'll talk about both. So I think the first thing that's happened is there's a lot of passive money now in the markets. And actually the market is, I don't know what the right word to use is, but it's dumber than it's ever been. In a sense that crazy things happen that make zero sense and they can last for a little while, but they don't last forever. And that creates great, incredible opportunities for us who have a longer term view and who do fundamental analysis and do really solid work. So there's so much money that's, it's only passive, but then there's also a lot of quantitative money that just follows trends and it doesn't, it just follows price action. So, and that leads to bigger swings and bigger volatility. And that's what I think we're going to see going forward. One of the things I think that hasn't changed is, you have to, I view you have to come on the ground and you have to visit the countries that you want to invest in if you're going to be a global investor. This is my 73rd trip to Mexico over the years. I've been here 4 times this year. I've been to Argentina 4 times, but I've been there 60 times over the years. You develop relationships and people, and it's really about human capital that Mike talks about, and the people that you get to know, and the context that I have in Argentina or Mexico. That's the most valuable asset that I have. I mean, they're so much more thoughtful and smarter and involved in their countries than I can be. But I can see a global picture, and I can put it in a global picture. I want to relay I think one of the most interesting meetings I ever had. It was very early in my career. In 1991, I was at Fidelity Investments. I started their emerging market fixed income and currency group, and we were the largest investor in emerging markets at that time. And I came to Mexico, and I had a dinner with Pedro Aspe. He was the finance minister at the time, and Rudy Dornbush. So Rudy Dornbush, Pedro Aspe, and I had a dinner at San Janel Inn. And Pedro laid out exactly what his vision was. And the Telmex privatization had just happened. He talked about we're going to give independence to the central bank. We're going to keep reasonably good fiscal policy. We're going to have solid monetary policy. We're going to have a free trade agreement with the United States. We're going to privatize more assets, and we're going to go for productivity and human capital in Mexico. He laid it out beautifully. And, it's amazing to have Rudy there, who all of us who've ever been in economics have probably used his textbook in macroeconomic 101. But the value in the insight that I got from that meeting, kind of looked for the next 2 or 3 years, just laid out the platform. And I felt a high degree of confidence in what was happening in Mexico. And it did very well over that period. And I tell you one thing about that dinner was the most amazing thing is we walked out, it was late, like 10:30, 11 o'clock after we finished. And I look out and there's Dr. Aspe walking home with no security. And I don't know if, in 91 in Mexico City, it wasn't the safest city in the world. And that was impressive. That was impressive. And, it's about people and leadership. And I talked about that earlier in politics and stuff. So that's incredibly important. This debt level we have in the U.S. is really a problem, but it's not only the U.S., it's everywhere in the world. We're indebted substantially from very lax fiscal policy over many years. And nobody talks about it now, but there'll be a moment probably very soon where that'll become a very big issue. And the problem we have now is we don't have fiscal policy as a tool anymore to try to resuscitate an economy. Let's say we go into recession in the U.S., we don't have fiscal policy left to do it. It's very difficult. So I think it's another one of the risks when we talk about, and we went over geopolitical risks, but there's a lot of economic risks also that are problematic. And the other thing is it's going to happen in the next 6 months. It's going to surprise the markets is inflation in the U.S. is going to not be good. It's going to be higher than expected. And the Fed is going to cut one more time on November 5th, and then they're going to have to stop. The inflation numbers are going to be terrible. If they cut further with the bad inflation, you're going to see the 10-year go up in yield, and they got a real problem on their hands. So there's some really dicey things happening in the next 4 or 5 months in markets, I think. And I hope that the president here takes the initiative to really grab the bull by the horns and to show her leadership and show that to her administration and breaks away from the past. And it would be very exciting, and Mexico would be one of the best places to invest. But it's up to the government and up to leadership, and just all I have to do is put the platform in place, the rule of law in place, the right concepts, and then the private sector and the human capital in Mexico will take it high.
All right, well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to thank the panelists and
Thank
look
you.
forward to the discussions later on today. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.